What if everything you think you know about being human is, well, wrong? What if we aren't just the result of millions of years of slow, steady evolution on Earth, but maybe something else? Something maybe designed or, I don't know, engineered? Welcome to Cool, Weird, and Possible. Today we're diving deep into an idea that is definitely cool, absolutely weird, and maybe, just maybe, possible. We're looking at this really intriguing and often, let's be honest, highly controversial idea that humans might actually be the result of alien genetic manipulation.
That's right. And for this deep dive, we've gathered, well, quite a mix of sources. We're talking everything from researchers delving into ancient mysteries like Zecharia Sitchin and a book called Exogenesis Hybrid Humans to, clips and transcripts from popular shows like Ancient Aliens. But we're also looking at actual scientific findings on ancient human hybrids, bioethics reports on modern genetic editing, and even some world folklore.
Wow, that's quite a range. So our mission today is to basically sift through all of this. We'll look at the claims from the alien intervention folks, see what kind of evidence or alleged evidence they point to, and then we'll sort of pivot, right, to what modern science and ethics actually say about genetic manipulation and, creating life itself.
Exactly. We're looking at the different perspectives, the stories, the science, the ethics. So get ready. We're exploring the possibility that the human family tree might have roots that go way beyond just planet Earth.
Okay, so where do we even begin with something this big and this out there?
I think you have to start with the theories that really laid the groundwork for this whole alien intervention idea. And a really central figure here is Zecharia Sitchin. His books, especially Genesis Revisited, they're pretty foundational in this field.
Right, Sitchin. He's the one known for interpreting those ancient Sumerian texts. Yeah, that's where the Anunnakis come in.
Precisely. Sitchin's whole argument was that these weren't just myths he was reading. He proposed the Anunnaki weren't gods in a mythological sense, but actual physical extraterrestrial beings.
Oh, okay. And they came from where?
From a distant planet he named Nibiru.
Nibiru. Yeah, I remember that name. The one with the crazy long orbit.
That's the one. According to Sitchin's interpretation, Nibiru has this massive elliptical orbit. It only swings through the inner solar system roughly every 3,600 years.
3,600 years.
Yeah. And he claimed that during these passes, the Anunnaki visited Earth.
And these weren't just quick visits, right? Sitchin argued they actually, heavily influenced early human civilization.
Significantly influenced, yes. He wasn't just talking about teaching basic writing or farming. He proposed they imparted really advanced knowledge, technological stuff, astronomical understanding, and crucially for our discussion, genetic knowledge.
Genetic knowledge, how does he connect that?
He looked at ancient texts, like the Babylonian creation story, the Enuma Elish, and read them differently. Not as purely symbolic myths, but as maybe coded historical records. Records detailing the Anunnaki arriving, being here, and their direct interactions, including, potentially, the genetic engineering of early humans.
So in his view, human origins aren't just about apes slowly evolving here on Earth. It's a story with ETs involved right from the start.
That's the fundamental shift Sitchin proposed. It completely reframes our history. And this idea of unexplained gaps, these anomalies in the standard story of human origins, that seems to be a big motivator for other researchers, too.
Like the authors of that book you mentioned, Exogenesis Hybrid Humans.
Exactly, Bruce and Daniela Fenton. Their book presents itself as a kind of scientific history of extraterrestrial genetic manipulation. They explicitly say they're investigating strange holes in the story that are known to science as anomalies. The idea is our accepted history and evolution have these missing pieces.
Okay. So if science can't easily explain something, that becomes a potential clue that maybe, just maybe, aliens were involved.
That seems to be the reasoning, yeah. This whole concept, ancient intervention explaining mysteries, it's also really central to the ancient astronauts theory you see detailed on Wikipedia and explored, constantly on shows like Ancient Aliens.
Right, the show that looks at old structures or texts and says, hey, maybe that wasn't humans, maybe it was aliens.
Precisely. Proponents like Eric von Daniken, Sitchin himself, and even, interestingly, a Presbyterian minister named Barry Downing. They all reinterpret religious stories through this alien lens.
Wait, a minister? Barry Downing. What does he suggest?
Well, the sources cite him suggesting that certain events in the Bible could have actually been caused by alien technology. He apparently even went so far as to interpret Jesus as possibly being an extraterrestrial, pointing to a specific verse, John 8:23.
Wow, okay, reinterpreting Jesus as an alien. That's bold. What about other biblical stories, like hell or the Garden of Eden?
Well, The speculation goes that maybe the description of hell isn't literal fire, but perhaps based on an ET showing early humans, I don't know, photos of Venus's surface
Huh, okay.
and the Garden of Eden story. With God and Satan disagreeing about humans getting knowledge from the tree of knowledge, that gets interpreted as maybe two opposing alien groups. One wanted to uplift humans with knowledge, the other didn't. Kind of like the Prometheus myth, actually.
So God and Satan are just rival alien factions, and the snake is maybe a symbol for knowledge transfer from one side?
That's the kind of speculative reading they apply, yes. And some push it even further. Von Daniken, for instance, proposed that original sin wasn't about eating an apple.
Okay.
He suggested it was a result of extraterrestrials, or maybe their descendants, actually interbreeding with early hominids.
Whoa. Hold on. So the story of fallen angels mating with the daughters of men in Genesis, they read that as aliens having sex with, like, early ape-like humans.
That's the interpretation offered.
Yeah.
And the Great Flood.
Yeah.
Possibly a punishment for creating those hybrids. It's quite a take.
It really is. And that Ancient Aliens transcript you mentioned, it really doubles down on this hybrid idea, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
It states pretty explicitly that humans today are byproducts of alien genetic manipulation. And then it adds this really provocative line, some more than others.
Some more than others. What does that even imply? Like different ET races experimented on different groups of people throughout history.
That seems to be the implication within their framework, yeah. They also float the idea that it wasn't just manipulation, but actual interbreeding between extraterrestrial humans and us, happening maybe in the last 5,000 years or so.
And they claim, this explains...
They connected to alleged monumental DNA changes, they say, occurred relatively recently in human history.
And they put a number on it too, didn't they? Something like 7% alien DNA?
Yes, the transcript makes that claim that potentially up to 7% alien DNA might be present in modern humans.
7%. Wow! Okay, so they're spinning these really dramatic interpretations of old texts and myths. But where's the actual proof? Like tangible evidence?
Well, according to the ancient aliens' perspective, the ultimate proof isn't going to be found buried in ruins or in old artifacts. They argue the real evidence of ET tampering is literally inside us.
Got our DNA.
That's the claim. They point to things they consider unusual DNA evidence as potential clues. The transcript mentions a specific example, a hair sample supposedly found with what they describe as Old Gaelic DNA mixed with Chinese DNA in blonde hair.
Okay. Gaelic and Chinese DNA in blonde hair. I mean, that sounds genetically interesting from a population migration view, but aliens, how do they make that leap?
Their argument is that this specific combination doesn't quite match up with conventional human history or known ancestry patterns. Therefore, they suggest you need to invoke something extraordinary like, quote, abduction and genetic interbreeding going back for many thousands of years.
Right. So find something weird or anomalous, and the default explanation becomes aliens.
Got it. What else do they point to? Well, in that same discussion, they make this pretty speculative jump. They try to connect the Christian concept of the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit being 1 and 3, to genetics.
The Trinity and DNA. How?
They suggest the number 3 might be, quote, the key to our DNA language. It's an attempt to link religious ideas directly to the structure of our genetic code, all within their speculative framework.
Okay, yeah, linking the Trinity to DNA codons, that's definitely creative. It really sounds like their method is finding anything slightly unusual or hard to explain conventionally and just shouting, see, aliens.
That seems to be the pattern, trying to fill those strange holes the Fentons talked about. But this is where it gets interesting because it brings us to what mainstream science actually says about ancient human populations and our genetic makeup.
Yes, because science has found real evidence of ancient mixing, right? Just maybe not involving aliens.
Absolutely. And this is where the story gets genuinely fascinating, based on solid evidence. We have scientific proof of hybridization in our deep past. A huge breakthrough came in 2010. Biologists led by Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, they analyzed ancient DNA. And they found unmistakable evidence that early modern humans interbred with at least 2 distinct archaic human groups, the Neanderthals and the Denisovans.
So our ancestors were actually having kids with these other kinds of ancient humans. It wasn't just separate lines.
Exactly. Mainstream science confirms it. Anthropologist Dr. John Hawkes has done a lot of work showing this through genetic analysis worldwide. It's not just a theory. It's written in our DNA.
And isn't there that one really incredible specific example from a cave in Siberia?
Yes, that's a fantastic case study. The Natural History Museum source details the discovery of this tiny 90,000-year-old bone fragment. DNA analysis should have belonged to a young girl. And get this, her mother was a Neanderthal, and her father was a Denisovan.
Wow. A 90,000-year-old girl who was a direct first-generation hybrid of two different ancient human species. That is concrete scientific proof of a human hybrid way back then.
It really is. And it provides such a strong evidence-based counterpoint to the purely speculative alien hybrid claims. It demonstrates that ancient hybridization is absolutely part of our human story, confirmed by genetics. But it happened between known archaic hominid groups living right here on Earth, not visitors from Nibiru.
That's a massive difference, and it really makes you think about how careful we need to be when interpreting evidence, doesn't it? Especially if you're kind of hoping to find a specific answer.
Absolutely. And our sources actually mention a few cautionary tales from the history of science that are pretty relevant here.
You mean like the famous Piltdown Man?
That's the classic example, yeah. For decades, back in the early 20th century, scientists thought this fossil was a crucial missing link. It looked like a human skull, but with a very primitive ape-like jaw.
And it turned out to be totally fake. Someone stuck a modern human skull piece together with an orangutan jawbone, right?
Exactly. It was a deliberate hoax, and it wasn't properly exposed until the 1950s. It's just such a powerful reminder of how a strong desire to prove a particular story about our origins can lead to serious misinterpretation or even outright fraud.
So yeah, confirmation bias is real. You look for something, you might convince yourself you found it. What about that Bombardier beetle example? How does that fit in?
That one comes up in the Ancient Aliens transcript, but in a slightly different way. It's sometimes used by people arguing against evolution because its chemical defense mechanism is so complex.
Oh, right, the beetle that shoots boiling hot chemicals.
Oh, that's the one. The point for us today isn't really about the beetle itself, but more how it shows that people can look at the exact same piece of complex biology and draw completely different conclusions about how it came to be and what it means.
Interesting. So from ancient myths and deliberate hoaxes to tiny beetles, figuring out where we came from is definitely complicated and wide open to interpretation. And this whole idea of strange origins or like hybrid identities, it isn't just stuck in ancient history or these grand theories, is it?
No, definitely not. It pops up in really weird modern ways, too. That Ancient Aliens transcript also mentions the bizarre case of a man named Jeffrey Allen Lash.
Jeffrey Allen Lash. I think I vaguely remember hearing about that. Wasn't he the guy they found dead, surrounded by like a massive arsenal of weapons?
That's him. And apparently he had told people close to him, including his fiancée, that he was actually an alien hybrid.
Seriously?
Yeah, an alien hybrid working for some secret government agency.
Wow. Okay. So you have someone, in our time claiming this very specific, very strange identity, an alien hybrid operative. That just adds another layer of weirdness to the whole topic.
It really does. It shows how this idea persists. Even if it's in a context that seems potentially delusional, it's a modern echo of the hybrid human claim, far removed from ancient Sumeria, but still part of that same strange narrative thread.
Okay, so we've journeyed from ancient alien theories based on myths and anomalies to the actual science of ancient human hybrids, and even touched on some really weird modern claims. Let's switch gears now, completely. If we're talking about genetic manipulation and creating hybrids, well, humans today are getting scarily good at doing this ourselves.
That's such a critical point. The report, Genome Editing and Human Reproduction from the Nuffield Council on Bioethics, really grounds us in the reality of what humans can do now with genetics.
Yeah, this isn't science fiction anymore, is it? We actually have the tools.
We absolutely do. The report goes into modern techniques like genome editing, things like CRISPR-Cas9, base editing. These technologies let us make incredibly precise changes to DNA sequences.
And the report draws a really important line between two kinds of editing, right?
Yes, a crucial distinction. There's somatic editing, which affects only the person being treated. Those changes aren't inherited by their children. But then there's heritable editing. That involves making changes to sperm, eggs, or embryos, changes that would be passed down to all future generations.
And that's the really controversial one.
Hugely controversial. The report notes that in places like the UK, heritable editing is currently prohibited by law, though there are very specific regulated exceptions, like mitochondrial donation for certain diseases.
But even without doing full-on heritable editing yet, we already use genetic tech in reproduction quite a bit, don't we?
We do. The report covers existing technologies like prenatal diagnosis, PND, non-invasive prenatal testing, NIPT, and preimplantation genetic testing, PGT.
Right, those are the tests used to screen embryos or fetuses for specific genetic conditions or traits.
Exactly. So we are already making reproductive choices based on genetic information. whether it's screening out embryos with a single gene disorder like cystic fibrosis, or assessing the risk for more complex conditions influenced by many genes. We are actively selecting based on genetics.
Which makes the idea of heritable changes even more loaded. What are the biggest ethical worries the bioethics report brings up?
Well, a huge one is the welfare of the future person.
Mhm.
If we make these permanent genetic changes, can we really be sure about the long-term effects? Decades later, we just don't know all the potential consequences. There's a lot of uncertainty.
And what about the effects on society as a whole?
That brings up major concerns about social justice and solidarity. There's a real fear that if these technologies become widespread, they could just make existing inequalities worse. Creating unfair advantages for those who can afford enhancements, maybe leading to new forms of genetic discrimination in jobs, insurance, things like that.
Especially since these changes could last forever, passed down through generations. That transgenerationalism idea is kind of mind-boggling.
It is. A change made now could affect lineages indefinitely.
Uh-huh.
The report also gets into deeper philosophical territory, human dignity, reproductive freedom, and something called the expressivist objection. That's the argument that if we start selecting against certain traits associated with disabilities, for example, does that send a message that people currently living with those traits are somehow less valuable? Although the report does note counter-arguments to that view as well.
It sounds incredibly complicated, and like who even gets to decide what counts as a good gene or a bad trait to edit out anyway?
That's a fundamental problem. The report explicitly points out how difficult it is to define a normal or desirable genome, especially given the immense natural genetic variation that makes us human.
Yeah.
And frankly, the science isn't even there yet for complex traits. We don't fully understand how to reliably edit genes to achieve things like, say, higher intelligence or specific personality traits.
It really puts our current power into perspective. It's growing fast, but our understanding and maybe our wisdom is still catching up. And it's not just about editing within our own species either. We're also kind of blurring the lines between species now, aren't we?
Yes, that David deGracia source brings up the modern reality of creating human-animal chimeras. This isn't just theoretical, it's happening in research. Scientists are introducing human stem cells into animal embryos or trying to grow human tissues like neurons inside animal brains, often in mice or rats, sometimes even primates.
So humans are actually creating hybrids now, not alien human, but human-animal hybrids. That's real.
It is real, primarily for research purposes, like studying diseases or potentially growing organs for transplants. And just like heritable genome editing, creating these chimeras raises huge ethical questions. Questions about moral status, about personhood. If you have an animal with significant human brain components, what is it, morally speaking? It's another way humans are now engaging in the kind of biological mixing that the ancient alien theories speculate about, only we're the ones doing it using our own science.
Okay, my head is spinning a little bit. This is a lot to take in. We've covered ancient stories interpreted as alien genetic engineering labs, these hints of maybe alien DNA in modern people, then the actual science confirming ancient human interbreeding. And now we land on our own modern labs where we're editing human genomes and literally creating human-animal mixes.
It really is a wild spectrum, isn't it? On one end, you've got the ancient astronaut proponents. They take historical anomalies, reinterpret myths, and weave this narrative of alien intervention and hybrid creation to explain the unexplained.
Right, filling in the gaps with ETs.
Then you have the hard science. Paleogenomics giving us concrete proof that ancient human groups did mix and hybridize, but with other known human relatives like Neanderthals and Denisovans here on Earth. And then, sort of straddling the present and future, is our own rapidly growing power in genetic science. We're gaining the ability to do things that were once confined to mythology or attributed to gods or aliens, manipulating life at its most basic level, and we're having to grapple with the massive ethical questions that come with that power.
It almost feels like the search for evidence of outside intervention in our past, whether it's aliens or just other ancient humans, kind of loops back around to us examining the incredible complexity and, frankly, the mystery that's still locked inside our own DNA. That idea from ancient aliens that the proof is in our DNA, even though it comes from a totally speculative place, it strangely echoes how mainstream science is now diving deep into our genomes to truly understand our origins and diversity.
So why should you, listening to this, care about this jumble of weird theories, ancient bone fragments, and dense ethical reports?
Well, because these stories, these discoveries, all these possibilities, They really push us to think differently, don't they, about where we came from and maybe where we're headed. They show how all these different fields, history, genetics, ethics, mythology, are all wrestling with the same fundamental questions about what it means to be human.
Right, and they force us to sharpen our critical thinking. How do we evaluate these really extraordinary claims against solid scientific evidence? How do we recognize when our own biases or hopes might be coloring how we see the past?
And maybe most importantly, they make us confront the reality of our own increasing power over biology. As we get better at manipulating life, the ethical dilemmas we face, they might actually echo some of those old speculative concerns about manipulation, only now we're the ones potentially in the driver's seat.
Yeah. These deep dives into the cool, the weird, and the possible, they stretch the boundaries of what we think we know. They remind us that the story of humanity is uh, definitely not over. And maybe it's a lot stranger than we usually allow ourselves to imagine.
So here's a final thought to chew on as you go about your day. Knowing what we now know for sure about ancient human interbreeding and seeing how fast our own genetic technologies are advancing, does this whole idea of hybrid humans, whether you imagine them in the ancient past or the potential future, whether you think aliens or humans are involved, does it change how you think about what it fundamentally means to be human?
Definitely something to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll catch you next time on Cool, Weird, and Possible.